are the superb knower of the things unseen. I don't know if that's a good translation. I Googled it and it came out right away. Is that more or less what is being put forth there?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let me pick your brain here. When it says, take me and my mother as two gods apart from Allah, a Catholic or even an Orthodox would then, upon observing that, would say, well, wait a minute. Is the Quran making the mistake of believing that the Christians were giving worship to Holy Mary? Is that what is going on there? Now, and I know I've heard different answers, but let me tell you one thing. Before you answer, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. A few years back when I was debating an Islamic scholar, I don't know if you've heard of him, you probably have, Dr. Musharraf Hussain. Have you heard of him?
No.
Okay. He translated a book called The Majestic Quran. And I remember when I was dialoguing with him, I said, well, look, it's probably a total misunderstanding. It's probably not saying that what I think from a plain reading, that it's accusing Christians of worshiping Mary. But he told me, he said, no, that is what the majority of us do truly believe. Is that a minority view? What is being said here? Can you break it down? Because I've heard one thing from a gentleman like him, and then another scholar will tell me something else. What is the view within scholarship? And can you break that down for us?
Okay, so the first thing to be said about this verse is that the context is really unclear in the Quran.
Okay.
So between verses 111 and 115, there's a really interesting anecdote in which the apostles of Jesus ask him to ask God to send down a table from heaven. So we can speak about that. I have thoughts about that too. But and then suddenly in verse 116, you have this verse which begins as you had it, where God turns to Jesus and he says, hey, Jesus, did you say to the people, take me and my mother as two gods apart from God? So, Muslim scholars would say, well, this was after God raised Jesus to heaven, right after, or maybe it will be on the day of resurrection, the day of judgment. But it's not really clear. There is this sense in that whole section between verse 111, even really 110, which is a long verse, if I'm getting it all straight here. There is this general sense of sort of foreboding, of criticism, of judgment of the Christians. For example, on the table scene, there's a bit where it says, anyone who disbelieves after I send down the table, I will punish him with a punishment the likes of which I've never punished anyone. And then the way the second little bit there between verses 116 and 118 ends, in verse 118, Jesus says to God, if you want to punish them, meaning the Christians, they are your servants. And if you forgive them, then you are the mighty, the wise. So there's just, Jesus is sort of like saying, they're completely in your hands. You have the right to punish them or to forgive them. Again, it's divine freedom. Okay. Anyway, so back to 116. So context is not really clear. There is this sense of criticism of Christians, but then exactly as you said, there's this dilemma, which is there are two possible critiques the Quran could be making. One is that the Christians are acting as if Mary were divine and treating her with so much veneration that they've essentially deified her. So that's possible. And then the other, which in fact, I think your conversation partner there was right, that Christians really do worship Mary. That they treat
the claim is being made there. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The claim that Christians really do worship Mary. And that would lead to the argument of critics of the Quran who would say, it's simple what's going on here. Muhammad has just misunderstood the Trinity. He thought that for there to be a son of God, there had to be some sort of relations between God and Mary. And so the Trinity would then be Father, Mother, Son. And so that's why God asked Jesus, did you say to the people, worship me and my mother as two gods apart from God? Because behind that is Yeah. Okay. In my opinion, it's really hard to know if the Quran is concerned with supposedly real Christian worship or adoration of Mary, or if it's caricaturing. There's another verse in the Quran, almost positive it's in Surah 5, but earlier on, where God says about Jesus that his mother was righteous, and both Jesus and Mary used to eat food.
Yeah.
I can get the
Well,
reference.
now that is a great point. As you get that up, let me give you a little thoughts on looking at it from an apologetics perspective. Now, another individual that I've dialogued with, I've had multiple debates with, would be Dr. Shabir Ali, who many years back, in my opinion, I'm not being disrespectful, I think as a kind of defense mechanism, he made the argument towards me that, and I believe it was a few years ago, I don't remember when, but I've heard the argument was brought up and it was said, well, look, what is being condemned are a fringe group of Christians, those that were worshiping Mary, and a number of individuals look early in church history and they'll say, well, there were a group called the Coloridians. They were condemned for offering the Eucharist to Mary, for worshiping Mary. But then the way that a Catholic or an Orthodox or even evangelical that is well learned would reply would be to say, well, that group had died out. Why would Muhammad be condemning, or why would the Quran be condemning a group that was no longer in existence? So I agree. I think we run into a number of problems there. But then how do you deal with the text that you just brought up? I don't remember it off the top of my head. To me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, please do. When it says that Mary ate food, I read that and I think, okay, it's trying to humanize Mary as opposed to the deity, a kind of divine-like figure that was, and that divine-like figure was being condemned. So is it condemning Christians that Muhammad believed were worshiping Mary by making that comment? How do we make sense of that?
Okay, so I don't have a definitive answer. Really interesting thoughts here, William. So thank you very, very much for raising this topic.